Hello everyone, today I'll be making a basic Tic Tac Toe game using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Here is what the finished product is going to look like. Just your basic Tic Tac Toe game. Here's the grid. You can give it a title of Tic Tac Toe with a nice glow effect, both for the turn text as well as the title. And whichever player's turn it is going to light up either a blue or a red color, which just a visually appealing aspect of it. And whenever one player goes, the ring will shift to the other color. So let's say the blue player went, which is going to be X. The other ring in red is going to color, and the text will accordingly update, saying red player's turn. And let's say they go again. It's again the text and the ring gets updated, saying that it's a blue player's turn. Let's just play this game out. Say that the blue player, which was X, has just won. It is going to say the blue player wins and present you with a reset button game. And it's just started again. Let's see right here. And let's get the red player to win this time. It says the red player wins again. Reset game. Pretty basic tic-tac-toe game, good for a beginner project if you're just getting started in JavaScript. Let's build this. Okay, so here I am in my blank VS Code editor. This is what my personal preference is to program in, but you can use any IDE for JavaScript, HTML, and CSS that works for you. All of my dependencies and file structure, you can see here, I made a main folder called JavaScript Tic Tac Toe. There's an images folder, img, with all of the images that we need to make the game in here, as well as the source folder with all the files. These are the three files that we need: the main.html, main.js, and style.css. You are going to be able to find all of this in my GitHub with a link in the description of this video, so you can just download all of these dependencies as well as the finished code in these files from that GitHub repository. So let's just get started. In VS Code, there are some features to make developing more efficient and faster. In this case, I have installed an HTML extension or plugin, whatever you want to call it, and it just allows me to make this skeleton body of any HTML file really quickly. If you don't have that, you can just type it out right here. Here it is. But just any basic HTML file, this is how it starts out. In this case, we don't really need the meta tag. It's a pretty basic code. So I'm going to remove that. The title, I'm going to call it Tic Tac Toe. And to be able to solve this file, I am just going to link our file to style.css. So in HTML, whenever you want to style a file, there are some styling aspects that you can do in HTML itself, but CSS is really the partner to HTML that allows us to make websites look really nice. And in this case, this is how you link an HTML file to your CSS file. In this case, it's called style.css. Here it is. And as well as second thing, to HTML and CSS files, CSS websites are really static and like old, which is where JavaScript comes in. It makes the websites look really nice. All the animations that you see these days on websites, making them really look modern, etc. It's done via JS. So I'm just going to link that file as well. It's a similar concept to what I just did with the CSS file, but in this case, the tag is just called script. It's the exact same thing, but this time it's just going to, instead of handling how the file looks, it's going to handle the behavior, make it interactive, and just make the code work the way that we want to. All of the winning detection, whose player's turn it is, which ring to light, all that will be handled inside the JavaScript file. So first off, let's just give our code a heading called Tic Tac Toe. I'm going to give it an ID of title. So here I'm going to assume in this tutorial that you're a complete beginner who has no experience with CSS, JS, or HTML. So I'm just going to just explain the code through that lens. you can skip ahead. I'm just going to go and explain what each and everything is here. So an ID tag in HTML is used to reference an element in HTML later in other files such as JS and CSS as well. So once you give it an ID title, whenever I call the ID title in either this JS file or in the CSS file, the computer knows that this title is what I mean. Okay, now next will be a div block that I'm going to code. So a div block, you can kind of think of it as a body within a body. So body in HTML is where all the content of your page is, and a div block is sort of like a subsection of that. And the reason that I'm creating a div block here is so that I can style the elements specifically inside this div block, which just makes it faster, and because all the elements inside here are going to have the exact same styling, I don't have to type out something 10 different times. I just have to type it out for this div block, and it applies to everything within. In this case, same concept. I'm going to give it an ID for board. In this case, it will make more sense in a second, but what the word board here in this case means is the Tic Tac Toe board that I'm going to install in just a second. Next, I want a button. So just as a normal button, the advantage of having buttons in HTML over other stuff is you can detect clicks on it and do actions based on that click. In this case, I am going to give it a class of a square. So similar to an ID, a class is another way to reference something. It helps in styling, and there's certain advantages and disadvantages to them. But yeah, in this case, I'm instead of going with an ID, I'm going with a style here. And the reason is because what I mean by square is one portion of the grid, so like one square or one box of the grid. And because I'm going to need 9 boxes, I'm going to just copy paste this 9 different times, and what the class square allows me to do is to just style all of it all together using just one square CSS element later that I will show you. And the difference with ID is that it's very specific, and it is only assigned to one element. Multiple elements can have the same ID, but with class, multiple elements are supposed to have the same ID multiple elements are supposed to have the same class in order to make styling easier. That should be 9 times 1, 2, 7, 8, 9. Yeah, that's 9 times. So our Tic Tac Toe will be a 3x3 grid, which is 9 squares or 9 boxes. And next thing I'm going to do is add player images. So in our original, you see that these player images you see right here, these are images that I just got off the internet. Again, you don't need to go through that. You can just get them from my GitHub repository. I'm just going to add them on there. And then again, I am going to take them later into CSS to style and make it look nice the way you see it in the final I guess state of the game. And then in this case, the player image, I'm just going to call it player 1. So alt source is just like the program is asking where do I get the image from, and then alt is just, hey, in case I can't load the image, the file is corrupted, or I don't know, bad internet connection, we can't load the file. What do I put it in place? So when the file isn't loaded, it's just going to say player 1 on one side. And when I add the player 2 image, it's going to say player 2 in place of the player 2 image if that doesn't appear for whatever reason. I am also going to give this an ID just like before. I'm going to call it player 1. So I'm just going to refresh this. Again, I know. This is what our page looks like right now. Really basic HTML page, no styling to it, no JS behavior to it whatsoever. I'll style this in just a second to make it look like the real thing. But I just wanted to show you that this is what it looks like right now. And yeah, you can see that player image is really big right now. What personal preference for me would be that I would scale this down to a specific size. I've already experimented with that off camera before, and what I liked were a width of 2000 pixels and a height of 190 pixels. And I'm just going to copy and paste that for our player 2. I'm going to, it's the exact same image like you saw in our preview, but yeah, it's just I want to add a second image for player 2. Everything else is the exact same. You can see here, I'll refresh this once again. It's 2 images now. One more thing that you can see right now that I'm going to address right now is that you can see that you can drag these images around as you can with other websites. I'm sure you've noticed this before. What I want on my specific game is that you shouldn't be able to drag these around. So there's a property in HTML for images called draggable. I'm going to set that to false so that we don't have to worry about players dragging these images around. See, I'm clicking and dragging it away. We're not able to drag it around anymore. We just get it. And the last thing inside the body that I want is another div block. Again, like I said before, it's just makes styling really easy. I'm going to give this div block an ID, turn text. So the text that you saw at the bottom somewhere around here earlier, this is what that div block is for. Yeah, and then we'll style that later in CSS again. I'm going to give this a B or a bold tag. You saw that some of the text earlier was bold, so I just want that here. So now in HTML, the way HTML and JavaScript just behave and interact, there's a little bit of gimmick that when I change the player turn to reflect whichever player's turn it is, it removes the space just because of how, again, JavaScript functions. And there are special characters that you can add to prevent that, and just manually add a white space, which is what I'm going to do here. There's nothing really special with it. This is just a random sequence as to what it was decided to be. And you can see that this turns blue, which means VS Code recognizes that this is a special character for a white space. And my starting player, if you noticed before, was a blue player. So to start the game off, I'm just going to type in blue player right off the gate so that the users know that the player 1 is the blue player. Okay. Now, so a lot of HTML, you can see the website doesn't really look the best right now. Now I'm going to take it to CSS and make it really look nice. So to start off, I'm going to address HTML, which is the whole page itself. As you saw in my image, there weren't really, when you moved around, there weren't any scroll bars appearing. That was intentional design, so for that I can do hidden. So when you resize the images in HTML, sometimes they go, some like blank space goes off the page, and that creates scroll bars because of just how web browsers are coded. In this situation, we don't really want that. We don't want any elements to overflow, so we can set overflow to hidden, which is going to prevent scroll bars from appearing on our game, which just doesn't look nice. It's sort of an aesthetic thing. Next is the body, which is again all the elements in the page, and for all of that, in this case, it is again the entire page. I want the background color for that to be different than white, so it looks nice. I've experimented with this before. All of these like sizing and colors, etc. These are all personal preferences that I've just figured out through trial and error. You can change these to however you like. In this case, I want my RGB code to be this. This is just like a nice beige color that I thought looked nice as the background, as you saw in my original image as well. Now, hash title. Okay, so when you want to style specific elements within CSS, there's different ways to call different, to reference different elements. In this case, title here is an ID. And the way you reference IDs in CSS is using a hash symbol. There's for classes, you reference them using a dot. So if this was a class title, I would say dot title like this, which I am going to do for the Square class. If you remember, this was a class. I will do that later. But in this case, it's hash because it's an ID, which is unique. So yeah, right now it looks really basic. I just want to move it to the center, make it look nice, change the font color, all that good stuff. Font size, I found this to be 70 pixel. That looked nice for me. I don't want the basic font, so I'm just going to change the font family to Cambria. This is just the syntax. All of this is syntax here. There's really not much to understand. And I want the color of my text to be in this case, I found that this code worked best for me. Again, I encourage you to go ahead and experiment with this. Make the game personal to yourself. See how you like it. In this case, position. Okay. I'm gonna stop there for a second and explain what this is. So position. Currently, the position of this HTML tag is just towards the right that we see. What I want to do is, like the original game, I want to move it towards the middle, somewhere around here. To do that, I want to set position to absolute, and I will define what that absolute position is, so it doesn't change the way as the game functions throughout. So the position is absolute, and I want the left to be 40.5. This is another one of those trial and error things. See what works for you. For me, I thought that this looked nice. Again, you can see that I changed the color, the font family, and the size, and just centered it. I thought this looked really nice. I encourage you to experiment with this and see what you like for yourself. Okay, so right now it's looking kind of basic. And what I want to do is I want to give it that glow effect that you were seeing in my original game. Just adds a little nice detail to it, and yeah. So in that case, this is going to be a text shadow. I'll explain the syntax here in just a second. Okay. So text shadow. Text shadow is exactly what it sounds like. This is a piece of text. It's going to add a shadow to it, and you know, the way shadows work is whatever angle you shine the light from, it goes in that direction. In this case, I want the first two values are just like how far away from the text do you want to move it, which is like how far away is the torch from the text sort of thing. And in this case, I want the shadow to be right behind the text to make it look like it's glowing. So I have just set these to 0. So it's gonna move down by 0, and it's gonna move to the right or left by 0 pixels. And how intense it is, or how, I guess you can call it how big the shadow is 12 pixels. Experimental, find what works for you. RGB, we already know what RGB is. The red, green, blue codes defines a color depending on the intensity of these primary colors. What the A in this case, if you don't know, it means is an alpha value. Alpha value is just the opacity or how intense that color is. In this case, I found that 1.5 looks nice. Yeah, if I just refresh that, you see that it gives it that nice glow effect that we want. And last thing, right now the user can select these, which I don't particularly like. So I'm just going to set user select to none as well. Or user select none. This makes it a little bit cleaner. If I refresh this, you can no longer select this text. I'll make sure that you can select these later in the code as well. The next thing I'm going to style is the player images. So there's one of the very basic, I guess, fundamental concepts in programming is that you want your code to be efficient, succinct, and readable. And one way to do that is make sure you don't repeat as much of it as possible. In other languages, and even in JavaScript, we'll see later, one way to do that is create functions. But in CSS, if multiple elements have the same style, one way to do that is going to be player one, again referencing the player one ID, and both of my players really have the same basis behind them. There's just a couple little niche differences that I'll add later, but what I can do is add a comma player 2. So now using this comma, whatever style I put it within these brackets is going to apply to both of these IDs, which in this case they reference to our player images. So just same as before, I don't want them towards the top right here. I'm going to set the position to absolute, and I'm going to define what that position is. To the top, I found that about 42% looks nice. Player width, we don't see that. Okay, so let me just show you what this right now looks like. So you saw that we had two images before, and you might be wondering where the second image went. In this case, they are both, because I styled them together, what happened was they both followed the position absolute, and now they are both at this exact same location. They're just overlapping each other. There's still two images there, but yeah, one of them is just like overlapping, so you can't see the other, which I'll fix that in just a second. So currently what I want, if you saw in the original game, was that there was a ring around the players, which not only does it look nice, it had the function that it lit up according to which player's turn it was. So I'm just going to add that ring around it right now. So that in this case is a border. The border style is going to be solid. So this just represent what kind of line do you want the border to be. There can be the dotted dash solid lines. I like solid best. You can change this if you prefer a different one. Border color, I want to be black to match the players. Now if I just show you that this right now is just a regular old square, what I want is this to be a ring, and for that you can change the radius of the borders, which kind of rounds out the edges. So say I do it 10%, you'll see it's going to round off the edges by 10%, but by that logic, if I set it by 100%, it becomes a complete circle, which is what I want. Next thing I want is to create the lighting up sort of animation effect. If you notice that the colors weren't just suddenly appearing, they were kind of nicely transitioning in, slowly lighting up and slowly lighting away. They weren't like, oh, it's the red player's turn, it suddenly lit up, and then it's the blue player's turn, it's suddenly the blue player lit up and the red player went away. It was a nice transition going in and out, which is what I want to add next. So it's literally called a transition, as I was mentioning. In this case, it's a box shadow. This is the exact same logic as our text shadow. So whatever syntax I'm using here, it's the exact same as what I did for the text shadow. 0.5 seconds, so I want the animation to last about half a second. I found that amount of time where it looked best for me, but you can change it to whatever you like. So in this case, I'm going to do ease in and out, so it comes in nice and slow and it goes out nice and slow, because if I just do ease in, it's going to come in nice and slow and go away abruptly, which doesn't really look nice either. And last thing for this one will be user select none. So just like before, you should no longer be able to do this when I hit refresh. See, so you can no longer select the player images. Okay, so this was the general shared styling effects, what I wanted for both players. Now I want the different ones that I want for these players to separate them a little bit. I can now even go again and type them again and then code them separately. So you see that it just saved me a little bit of time here. Okay, 6%. And then if I go player 2. Again, these are just arbitrary values I found by trial and error. You can find what you like. So you can see that this is how I wanted the players to appear, but all of this, they both had the exact same anyways. The one of the differences was their location in reference to the left corner of the screen. One is only 6% away, the other one's almost 80% away. And yeah, this was the difference. So I didn't have to type all of this twice. I just had to type all of this once, and then I could just change this separately. It's just more efficient, and your code is more readable. So for player 1, box shadow that I referenced before, that I referenced right here, now I can define that box shadow as well. In my original game, if you noticed, the starting player was the blue player, and was the blue player. So player 1 in my CSS file was referencing the red player. So to start off, that will have no shadow, and then the blue player will have a box shadow to begin with. So right out of the gate, my users know that it's the blue player's turn to go. This RGBA code is what I found looked best for my player. Okay, so you can see this is the halo effect that we saw. JavaScript is the one that's going to be handling the switching between the two. That we'll code in later, but this is the essence of the code. Now to the main stuff. Next, I will be handling these buttons that you see. They're currently in a line, which isn't really Tic Tac Toe. So I'm going to just line them up into a grid now. So I can go dashboard. If you remember, the board was our div block that handles the entire grid, so I don't have to style everything one by one. So the board, I am going to get a margin from the top. So from the top, I want to move it down by 15%. I want it from the left and the right. I'm going to set the margin to auto. 1 second, to auto. And what this right here is going to do is it's going to center it once I add 1 or 2 more things according to what I define it to be, basically. So right now the margin is auto, but then when I define other stuff and using the dot squares class, it just knows that this is where the grid needs to be, which in this case is the middle of the page. Next, I want the width of the entire grid to be about 400 pixels. So in this case, I'm going to do 375 pixels. Height. It's an even grid, square, so both are the same. The display is, so this part might be confusing for some of you, so I'm just going to type it out and then explain it as we go, so it makes a little bit more sense. So we can fix these elements later, but the main point here right now is that you can see the squares are now lined up. So let me just show you what I did here. So first off, as I explained, the margin from the top is 15% lower, and the grid is taking about 400 by 400 pixel area. And the display is, so there's different displays mode that you can do for different elements inside of HTML. This is one of the main reasons that I put my entire grid in one div block, because I can set that div block into a grid display instead of having to manually place every single box. So the next thing I did was a grid template columns. So repeat 3 1 FR. So what this is saying that per column put 3 boxes, which makes sense. It's Tic Tac Toe. It's supposed to be a 3x3 grid, and for each box I wanted to take up a space of 1 fraction of the area. So it's going to take 1/3 of the space, both vertically and horizontally. It takes 1/3 of the space, which gives us this this nice grid. Okay, I hope that makes some sense. So again, column of 3, and each box takes 1 fraction, so 1/3 of the space. Now I'm going to reference our first class. In this case, it's a dot square again, because I want to style all of these the same way. I can just say dot square because I referenced it as a class. They're all going to style just under one element, going back to our efficiency argument for programming. Okay, so this is what I specifically want the width and the height of the boxes to be. You can see that they shrunk a little bit. I just thought it looked nice because it makes a little bit of the grid. It just widens, it just thickens it a little bit, which looks nice. Personal preference again. So now I'm going to add a border around the boxes of about 2 pixels. I'm going to make it solid, like I already explained for players before. It's the exact same thing, just now I'm typing all the syntax in one row to make it faster. And RGB, this is going to be the color that I want. I tried black, it didn't really take for me, so I gave it a bit of a yellow, a gray shade, which was this code for me. So if we just refresh, this is what the nice outline that I gave it. Let's see. And next, I wanted the background color. I wanted the backgrounds. I thought that the white looked a little bit off-putting, so I just set it the exact same color as the background, so to give it like a transparent effect. I can just copy that code right there for the color. So if I just refresh, this makes it look nice. Next, font size won't really come into play right now. It will come in later when we set these players to some value. So the size of the X's and the O's inside, that will follow the font size. Let's call it display flex. And justify content to the center. Okay, so in this case, what I did was I set each box as a. Wait 1 second. Each box as flexible. So when you click on it, you can click on it anywhere. What it's going to do is it's going to align the X's and the O's within towards the center. Just makes it like right in the middle of the box, makes it look nice and clean. And now I guess we can, I'm just going to fix this Tic Tac Toe typo right here. Okay. So what so the issue that it's causing is from the top, it's not defined. So I'm just going to really just define the top, that's it. So that that position is also absolute. So again, to fix this, I did a little bit of a trial and error, and I thought 1% worked best. So -1%. It just sets it back to the top. This happened because just how HTML is adding all the elements. It just happened to add it on the top because the position wasn't defined when I set all the other elements. But when I did define it, it set it back to the top, which just makes it look nice, I guess. Okay, now for the main stuff for the JavaScript file. Okay, so this one is going to be really logic heavy, so let's try and go through it. Variable player equals 1. So this starting value for player is going to be player 1 is going to be starting. I'm going to flip through that later. Variable squares. So currently JavaScript does not know what the grid of these squares is. So I'm just going to define what they are inside of JavaScript so it knows what I'm talking about. Document.get element by ID. It's pretty intuitive here. So it's from the document, which our document is the HTML page, get element by ID, and the ID will be square. Oh, sorry. Get element by class name. It's not an ID. Get elements by class name. So our class name is square. So it's going to grab all the elements with the class name square. Okay. Next, what I am going to do is variable turn text. So this will be the text at the bottom that we saw right here. So this text, I'm going to just make it look nice. Put it right here in just a second. So I'm going to define that as document get element by ID. This one we set it as an ID, and then we just call it turn text. Okay, so now JavaScript knows what I'm talking about there as well. What I am going to do now is just do a little bit more CSS that I think I was going to do after the JavaScript file, but I think it'll make more sense if we do it now. So hash, this we have not defined yet, but the XO image, the X and the O's that we're going to place inside these squares, I don't want them to be selected like this text either, so I'm just going to do the same thing as before, user select none. It'll make more, you'll know exactly what this means when we do the JavaScript file, but XO image is what I'm going to define it as, the X's and the O's that we place inside the grid, and I don't want them to be selected. Next is the turn text that I just defined. A few things I want from this text, like you saw before, it had a specific weight to it, a specific font to it, a specific size, and just it also had a little bit of a glow effect. I don't know if you noticed. It was a little bit subtle. So that's what I'm going to do now. First thing I'm going to do is center it. So we already know I'm going to set the display as flexible, just like I did with the squares. And then I am going to justify the content to the center. Again, just like I did with the squares, display flex center. This is going to center this text. In that case, and centered anything inside the squares to the middle, because that was the button and we're centering the values. In this case, because it's just text open inside the entire body, it's going to center it for the whole page. Width for this, it's a div block, so the div is going to span the entire width of the screen, so 100% across. And then what just this will allow is if it's the whole width of the screen, and then the center of the screen is where we want to place it, which is the justify content of the center. I want the margin from the top to be 6%. Again, same as before, margin left. Actually, let me just use this. Margin left and right will be auto. So again, just helps center the elements after we change them, which we're going to do in the JavaScript file. If you remember that after the game was over, we were adding a reset button there. What this is going to allow us to do is it's going to keep it centered, which is the nice dynamic part about JavaScript and CSS and HTML. Next, a little bit of a personal preference. I thought the button looked a little bit small, so I added a 1% padding. Very subtle, but just made it look a little bit cleaner. The font size I want to be 25 pixels, so make it look nice and bold to make it stand out. Text shadow. I didn't want to add a bold effect because I thought that looked a little bit too much, so I added a very slight text shadow to it, which kind of separated from the background and it looked nice. This is the same code as before that I did, and I don't want user to be able to select this either. It just makes the whole page look cleaner, and ta-da, this is what it looks like now. We know that turn was bolded from the HTML, and we just centered it and added a box shadow and made it stand out to really show which player's turn it is. Okay, that is it for HTML for now. There's one more element that I will do after we do the JavaScript file, so it makes more sense. So I'm going to add a constant. A variable is something that I'm going to change throughout the code depending on the condition and the situation that I need it to be. Constant is something that is set that is not going to change later in the code, because we know these to be facts and the truths in our game and in any situation in coding, and we don't want them to accidentally change throughout the code, which might create like unintended behaviors and malfunctions. So winning combination is just the set of rows, columns, and diagonal lines that are going to allow us to win. I'm going to define them right now, but I will explain what they are in just a second, and then we'll use them as well. In this case, it's 0, 1, 2. Again, if you remember, indexes in programming languages are usually, they start from 0. So in this case, our boxes are from 0 to 8, which is 9 boxes or squares. Okay. Now let me just quickly explain what this is. It'll make more sense later when we're actually checking for the winning combinations. So if I just inspect this page, let me show you what this is. Okay. So if I just hover over here, you can see that this is square 0 in this case, and so on and so forth. What I am doing here is referencing 0, 1, and 2. So if in this case it's 0, 1, and 2 that I'm going to check for later are the same, it is a winning condition. Same as 4, 3, 4, 5 are the same, which means this row is a match. Later I can check this row is a match, this column is a match, this column is a match, this column is a match. And then later the last two lines are the diagonal checks. This diagonal is a match and this diagonal is a match. It'll make more sense later. Okay, so I am going to start by defining the player turn function. So let's just call it player turn. Wait, if player equals 1, which is what we did set it to, if you remember from the get-go, I'm going to set it as document.get element by ID. Just a couple changes that I'm going to make based on that. Player 2 dot style dot shadow is none. Okay, so when the player is at player 1, the second player should not have a box shadow, so we're setting it to none, really making sure that the other one doesn't have a box shadow. And if you remember, the player 1 itself, we've already set in CSS to have a box shadow to begin with, which was right here. And then as the game iterates throughout, it's going to keep checking again and again, and it's just going to keep setting it this way. And then I'm going to copy this down here. And player 1 itself, later in the game, when the shadow is removed, we want to add it back in. The first turn, it won't make a difference because we've already added the shadow. But after then, when we remove the shadow, when the player is switched, we want to add back the same shadow. So I'm really just going to copy this right here because we want this to be set as the exact same. Okay, so get element by ID. Here, let's just roll back and understand what this is. So get element by ID, we got the element, the image with the player 2 ID in this case. Now that includes the ring as well. And for that, style.boxShadow. The way JavaScript references CSS element is a .style feature, and .style is inside. Hey JavaScript, go inside the CSS file using .style and pick out the box shadow for this element ID and set it to none. This is what it's saying. And the same thing is happening down here. And last thing I want to do, turn text, which is which should define whose turn it is. I want to change that when the turn is changing to the second player, which I'm just going to copy from right here. Okay, so I'm just going to change this here as well because I just to get a point across, you don't have to do this. And ESP. Okay. So there's multiple ways to do everything in programming, right? And in this situation, you saw that this tag for white space that we added right here, just to make sure that there was a space between the turn and the blue player. So this is a second tag that just does the exact same. It's just another way to do the exact same thing. I put it in here just to show you both ways and tell you that there's more than one way to do stuff in programming. And okay, that was it for our first player. So make sure that the second player has no shadow, make sure that I have a shadow for player 1, and then make sure that you reflect that after I'm done that it's the other player's turn. Okay, so this will be the exact same. Just a few differences. Now, this is going to flip. So player 1 will be none, and player 2 will have a box shadow. Oh, okay. So this will be about 120. Sorry. And in this case, player 1 was 200. Sorry. Just 1 second. Okay. I'll explain this again in 1 second. This was the blue player. Okay, so inside of my JavaScript file, player 1 is my red player and player 2 is my blue player. So the player turn, what I'm going to call it when I want to switch a turn. So what it's going to do is, if the player right now is 1, I wanted to switch to player 2, which is the red player. So player 2, the tag, in this case, it's just a tag, it's just a name. We're actually switching to player 2, but I know it's a little bit confusing. This was just a design flaw here on my part. I apologize for that. But the name here is that player 2, which is actually the first player, the blue player. I'm going to set him to none, and player 2, which is, in this case, it's called player 1. I'm going to set that to have a box shadow and make sure that our text reflects that it's the red player's turn now and the blue player is turned off. And then I'm doing the exact opposite here, except it's the blue player now. Okay. And oh, one more thing. Actually forgot to switch. Player, we want to set to 2. And then player, we want to set back to 1. Okay. This player variable is what we're actually changing here, and this later in the code, it's what's going to determine whose turn it is inside the code. Okay. So this was just like a bit of a check that we had to do. And then next, I am going to initialize the board. So we're just going to initialize the board, or just get it ready to place turns. That's it. In this case, all that's going to do is call the player turn function depending on which box it's clicked on. So if I click on, say, this square, it's going to place something there. If I click on this square, it's going to place something there. That's just accordingly, that's how the board is going to be initialized. Bar, so for, it's going to be a for loop going throughout the entire board over and over and over again to check which box the player is clicking on. We haven't defined the selector square yet. We're going to do that later. My apologies there. Equals 0. Just your basic for loop structure for any programming language that you might have done before. This is just how it's done in JavaScript. Just syntax here. So define that we're starting at 0 for and stay within the length of the squares array, which we know is 0 to 8, so 9. Stay under that and increment. So first check the second square, check the third square, check the fourth square. And now what I'm going to do is squares I. So I'm going through each of the entire board and checking for the event of a click. And when a click happens on whichever box that happens on, so the index I is like, if it's the program knows that it's on the second iteration, which is going to be 1 in this case. So the first box, it's going to return our value of it's going to call the place turn function on there. Okay, so what the place turn function is, I'm going to define that in just a second, is say I am hovering over this board and I click on the middle box. That one has whatever index that has. It's going to call the place turn at that index, and it's going to place the X or the O depending on the player turn at that square. I hope that makes sense. And Now I'm actually going to define the place turn function, because right now we just arbitrarily called it place turn, but we actually need to tell the code what to do for place turn. Square index. So square index is going to be this index that we handed in, whichever square is clicked on. For that index, what I want you to do is place to turn, which I'm just going to code out here in just a second. This one's a bit of a longer one, so bear with me. So I'm going to call it square index. If selected square dot inner HTML does not equal nothing, then just return. Okay. So when we place a turn, we want to make sure that that block is empty. Otherwise, if there's already an X there, we can't place an O on top. That's not how Tic Tac Toe works. So what this is saying, if the index of the selected square inside inner HTML inside is not empty, so it's here that's represented by an empty string, and the exclamation is the not here, so is not equal to empty, just return or just don't do anything. That's all it's saying here. And now if it is empty, that's where the rest of the code is going to go. So I'm going to define var image as document.create element. So in JavaScript, you don't just you can't just call elements. You can also create them this way. Create element. ID. So this is the set attribute is me setting the style. Another way of setting the style functions. The difference between style and set attribute is style is stuff that's already been defined inside CSS, and set attribute is me adding more attributes to using JavaScript to whichever function it is, to whatever function it is. So this is where the XO image comes in, the one that we defined here. So the user can't select the images that we place inside the squares. I hope that makes a little bit more sense now. An image set attribute. And same thing as before, I don't want the user to be able to drag this either, so I'm going to set draggable to false. Oh, by the way, you might see me just going flipping between the single and the double quotes. It doesn't really make a difference in JavaScript. I can pick whichever one I really want. Although there are conventional practices in place for this, in our case, because this is just a beginner tutorial, it doesn't really make a difference. If player equals 1, so if it's player 1, we know that player 1 is also always going to be an X, player 2 is always going to be an O. So I'm going to define the image source accordingly. So if it's player 1, then image.source is going to be the source of the X image. So whenever player 1 clicks, it only places an X, because that's temporarily, we can say that that's all the code knows for now. That's all that's loaded. So I'm just going to do that. img, going inside the images folder and fetching out the x.png file. Again, just a good practice here, setting image.alt as in case the image isn't loaded, player 1. Don't really need it in our case again, but for more advanced applications, just a good practice if you're creating like a large application. It's good to good to know that when you're creating a really large application, sometimes it might not load. So you can just add that there. And then I'm going to add a data player. I'll explain that in just a second again. So, okay, a data player, in this case, what I'm going to do is when you click X0, XO, I'm going to put 1s and 2s down, because we can't, in HTML, in JavaScript logic, I can't really check for an image. So the 1 and the 2 is what I'm going to check for the winning combination. So when the 0, 1, and 2, when 0, 1, and 2, they're all 1 or they're all 2s in that places, I know that some player has won. So that's the logic there. It's all really starting to tie together here. I'm sure it was a little bit of a struggle understanding it in the first place, but let's just add those there. And then it's just going to be the exact same thing, but for player 2 this time. Player 2. The image that we want is o.png. If you're creating a large application, it doesn't load for internet problems or whatever, we can set that to player 2. So our game, I guess, is still somewhat player, but although that really won't happen in our case, we're creating a fairly small application. Most computers these days should be able to handle it, no problem whatsoever. Next, what I'm going to do is image.width. So the reason I'm finding these out here is because I want both the X and the O to be the same size. So image.width, I'm just going to set it to 100, and image.height. And this is just arbitrary testing. You can do whatever works for you. Then the selected square, selected square dot append child. Okay, explain that in 1 second. Image. So the selected square, whichever square is selected, whichever square is clicked on, we're going to append child. In this case, that means add one instance of that image in that square. So if this is selected, the reference for this square, the image is going to be added into that square. It's going to be a child of that, I guess one instance or child of that image is going to be appended or added onto that square. Then every time we check, we're also going to check, hey, has the player won? So say in the initial turns, it won't really make a difference, but say the board is getting full. Every turn we have to check, say like, oh, the player displays it here. Let's check the whole board. Did the player win? Oh, they won or they didn't win. So every single time you place a turn, you can just scan the whole board really quick and check if the player has won. So I'm just going to check win. I'll define that function later, just like I did with the place turn function earlier here. Player. Okay, so sorry, there's just a bit of an issue in the background. Back at it again. If the player has won, I want to do a few things. First off, I am going to do a set timeout. Will make sense in a second again. Okay. Let's call it 50. So when we're checking for the player win, the computer is so fast that it won't give the code enough time to place the image and then declare a winner. So what the set timeout function does is it adds a delay. So when the check win function has returned that, hey, oh, just player one just won, instead of just directly going to the check player, it's going to add a slight delay to give some time to place the image and then declare that one of the players has just won. And it's going, in this case, the delay is 50 milliseconds. And a few things I want to do when a player won. Turn text, I want to set that to inner HTML equals backticks explaining that in just a second. Backticks are also special syntax in programming, or in JavaScript, not programming in general. There. Okay, so backticks are creating format strings and JavaScript here. Other languages also have that. When there is a string you want to add and then there's a variable you want to insert that string inside that string, it's called format string. And in this case, that is this was the syntax for it: create backticks and add a $sign with curly brackets, and this is and then just insert the variable inside. So in this case, when the checkout winner says that, hey, there's a winner, and the player turn was at player 1, it's going to say player 1 wins. When it was players 2 that just went and a win was declared, it's going to say player 2 wins, because that's whose turn we checked on, that's who placed the last square, and that's who won. And then next, what I'm going to do is now that we know that the player, one of the players has won, I'm going to put the reset button there so that we can reset the board and the players can get another game. So I'm going to declare bar reset button. Create element. This time we are creating the button element. So before I go further, I'm just going to go ahead and add a couple of style features to this button to make it look nice. Again, personal preferences. In this case, I encourage you to play around with it and just add different stuff to it. In this case, I want adding padding to be 5 pixels. Makes the button look nice, it doesn't look congested. Background, I am going to set to specific color as well. RGBA 151, 73, 0, and then the alpha value is 0.3. And nothing we haven't seen before in this case. I've already explained all of this before. Without the alpha value, so it's add a little bit of a difference, a visual difference there, so it looks nice. Border radius I will set to 5 pixels. Font size will be large. There's some predefined values also you can set for font size and user select and other like font weight and other attributes as well. Just makes the programming a little bit faster. I thought it looked fine in this case, so I didn't really define a specific exact number like 10 pixels for it. I just said large, it looks fine. And now I am just going to go back to our reset button and add some functionality to it. So reset button dot inner HTML, so inside the button, I want it to say reset game, so the player knows what the serious button is. Reset button dot set attribute. So in you might have noticed that in the CSS I'm referencing this as an ID, so I'm just going to set the ID as reset button so CSS knows what we're talking about here. And then I am going to inside the turn text div block, I'm going to append this button just like we did before, append child, reset button. And last thing I'm going to do with this is same as we did before, I'm going to add a click event listener, and then when it's clicked, I'm going to reset the game. Click is detected, perform this function. In this case, I am just going to call reset game here. Again, I'm going to be defining that later. And then finally, it will say, I'm going to also say return to make sure the rest of the game stops right there. Return is, it's kind of just going to stop the players from playing further. Okay, and that's actually placed wrong. That should be placed right here. Okay, yeah, so it's inside the if, so when this statement is true, it does it right away, it doesn't wait till outside. Okay, then I am going to actually, I can just copy this out again. Check, instead of checking for win, I am going to check for a tie. There were some subtle differences in there which made it enough for me to separate them into different functions. And in this case, I'm going to say it's a tie, and everything else I'm just going to keep the exact same. That's all the difference that we needed there. And then every time a player is placed and nobody wins, I can call the player turn function and give the turn over to the other player who hasn't gone yet. Now, I am going to check for the wins and then check for the ties and lastly create the reset game function, and then we're done. Just a little bit more to go through. Check win. And I'm going to give it the current player argument. So this parameter will be the player function that we give it up here, right here. So we're just going to loop through the entire board just like before to check for wins. So for let I equals 0, I is greater than winning combinations dot length, so the length of that array, and then increase that to iterate over cons. So cons A and B, comma C. Okay, so I'll explain that in just a second. Winning combinations I. Okay, so our winning combinations array was a two-dimensional array, which means every element itself is an array also. So when I set that to constant here, I don't want these to I don't want this to change the winning combinations array or the other array. I just want to check it for what it is. So when I say winning combinations I, say it starts at 0. So the 0 index is this right here. It's going to return this array, which it's going to quote unquote unpack into A, B, and C values. And that's what we're going to check for, if A, B, and C are the exact same. the next thing that I'm going to do here is get the images inside those squares. Let's call it imga squares a dot query selector. Query selector is just like get element ID, is just another way to fetch elements. The differences between them are a little bit beyond the scope of this video currently. Just for time's sake, if you're really interested, I guess you can leave a comment below this video or just Google it, and I can respond and help you out as well. Just going to do that, and now I can change that to B and change that to B and change that to C. So this the image at square A, square B, and square C. We're going to get the images on those locations. And if image A okay, so now I explained why. I can explain why we got the images. Okay. So in programming, we just want to be as safe as possible to prevent any bugs within our code from crashing the game as much as we can, other than dealing with malicious users. So in this case, what I'm going to check is, without changing the images, get the image in this square, get the image in this square, and get the image in this square. And if all of that is true, if all three of those squares have an image, then we can go and check for the winning combination. Otherwise, we don't have to at all right away. We know that we don't have to do it. Then we can check if, now this is going to be a bit of a big one, image A dot get attribute. So first there was set attribute, which was setting attributes. Now we're going to do a get attribute. Can remember, we set the data, the player. So right here, data player. Whenever player 1 plays something, that box was set to 1. When player 2 plays something, that box was set to 2. So now we're going to check if A, B, and C are all 1 or all 2, and if they're all the same, we know that the same player plays a turn, and consequently we know that all of those boxes are X's, O's, or X's or O's, and one of the players is 1. Equals current player dot toString. So toString is just us converting the number 1 or 2 to a string that allows us to compare them. Just sort of a syntax thing. You know what? I don't have to copy this out. It's the exact same. So I can just copy this right here. And add all, and this AND operator is just saying that all 3 values need to be true. So if that's true, I am going to return true. Return true, that yes, somebody has won. Otherwise, down here I can say return false, that no, somebody has not won. Next thing is the check type function. This one's fairly simple compared to the other one. Actually, let's copy paste this right here as well. Yeah, but instead of checking for winning combinations, I'm just going to check the entire array. Okay, so if the entire array is, that is, my apologies. Okay. Great. If all of the squares, what I'm going to check is if all the squares are full, then it's a tie, because currently nobody has one and all the squares are full, which means it's a tie. I'm actually going to do the inverse of that in this case, so that we can constantly keep checking if squares, again it's iterating through each square, checking if each square in our HTML is blank, then return false. So if even one square is blank, the game hasn't ended, nobody has won, and a tie hasn't occurred just yet. But if that situation is not true, then we know the inverse is true, then all of the boxes are full, then we can just return true, that yes, a tie has occurred. And lastly, the final function that I am going to code is going to be a reset game function. Again, same as before, just telling the players whose turn it is. Yeah, so when we reset the game, our starting player is a blue player, so I'm just going to keep it at that. And then 4. When we reset the game, we're going to go through each square once again, and at each index we are going to set them to be blank, so that we can be ready for the next player, for the next game. And then player 1 will be back to 0, which is the blue player. Document get element play ID, and then we're going to set the player shadows to, again, the red is going to have no box shadow, and our blue player is going to have a box shadow to indicate that it's their turn. Element by ID, player 2 dot style dot box shadow equals, same as before, just copy paste it once again. Okay, and that is done. And now for the final touches, we actually have to call the initialize function. Load. We are going to call the initialize board function. So that is our entire code, and let me just go through it with you. So when the window is loaded, we are going to call the initialize board function, and I'm just going to go through it so that you understand the flow of it. The initialize board function is going to check for clicks on each of the squares, and if there's a square placed, if a button is clicked, we are going to place an X or an O image depending on the player. And then each time we place an image, we're going to check for a winner. If there is, we're going to declare a winner, stop the game right there. And if there is no winner and all the boxes are full, we are going to declare a tie and then stop the game there and make the reset button appear in both cases. Yeah, and then for the check and the check win and check tie functions are already declared here. Let's refresh it.